So in 2013, I sold my home in a short sale, and it was a really difficult decision. It was emotional. It was really hard to do. It inspired feelings of shame and failure. I felt like, oh my gosh, I lost my house. It was the one thing that I kind of had as a badge of honor. And having to sell my house was really difficult. The time that followed was a really challenging time, but I did make one really critical decision that was an excellent decision that I to this day am still benefiting from, and that was to become a kind of a scientist, like a forensic scientist, like a private investigator in my own life. And I asked myself, why? Why did this happen? How did this happen? How did I get here? Because I knew if I didn't have an answer to that question, that it was quite possible that I would repeat the same patterns and recreate the same experiences. And so even though it was really painful to turn the lens and look inward, at first it was painful to do that. I slowly began to do that. I slowly began to turn the lens on myself and look at my own behavior. I had a lot of information about the external obstacles and the external challenges that had created this situation. It was, the recession in 2008 had created a global mess, literally, for millions of people of all economic brackets. And so there was a lot happening that wasn't necessarily about me, but what I learned was I had to get curious about the part that was about me. That was the only place I could really navigate from. That was the only place I had any power. I was reading a lot of wonderful books that were more personal development books. They weren't really financial books per se, but they helped me to think. They helped me to use my imagination in different ways. And so one of the best discoveries that I made during that time, one of the exercises that I came up with, at first it was just an experiment, was something that I call keeping a base balance. So what is a base balance? A base balance is at first small amount of money. It grows over time, but let's just start from the beginning. A base balance is a small amount of money that you hold on to no matter what. You hold on to that money even when things are going wrong. You hold on to that money even when you need it. You decide that rather than cracking open your savings, this is what I used to do. You might be better off, but I used to crack open my savings when there was a problem, challenge, emergency, bill that I forgot about, bill that I didn't forget about. I cracked open my savings left and right. And I talk about that. If you haven't watched it already, go watch my Savings is Cartilage video, because I talk a little bit more about that there. But I cracked open my savings a lot. So I had this, I call it perpetual heartbreak. I had this experience of perpetual heartbreak where things would be going well and I'd be like, oh, good, I can save money again. And then the cycle would go right back to the beginning and I'd crack open my savings and take a little bit out here, take a little bit out there. And next thing I knew, my savings had evaporated yet again. And I found myself doing that over and over and over again. And so one day I just had this moment where I thought, oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm repeating this pattern over and over again. I'm spending down to zero. And I thought to myself, if I can figure out how to navigate through this moment, this kind of zero moment, and I can figure out what to do, how to slow my spending, how to make more phone calls, how to generate more business, how to look critically at my budget, how to question my spending, how to slow things down, and zoom in more and take a breath so that I can figure out what to do, if I can do all of those creative problem-solving things when I'm back down to $25 again, I've spent all the way back down to $100. Why can't I do that when I still have some money in the bank? It was a question that I didn't have an answer for at first, but just asking the question was the beginning of starting to change that pattern. And so in asking the question, I decided to do an experiment where I decided that I was just going to hold on. At the time, I really didn't have a lot of money. I think I had about $100 in cash at the time, and all the bills coming in, and you know, I think I had some receivables that were a little too far off from my comfort level. So money was coming, but not quickly enough. And I just decided, okay, whatever I do, however I figure out how to get through the situation and out of the situation, I'm going to hold on to $30. So at the time, this was about a third of what I had in cash, period. And so I made that commitment. I made that decision just out of curiosity. And that was my first base balance. And the process of holding on to that money was what opened up all of these other realizations, questions, and possibilities for me. Ultimately, what keeping a base balance was really about was interrupting the routine, interrupting the pattern of spending back down to zero. Another thing, keeping a base balance changed the assumption that, oh, if there's an emergency, if there's a problem, if there's a bill to be paid, if there's an expense of any kind, I'm going to go crack open my savings. I have the money. Isn't that what it's for? I stopped that. What I decided to do instead was say to myself, just as an experiment once again, I said to myself, okay, what if instead of my savings being the answer to this problem, my imagination is the answer to this problem? If I take my savings off the table completely and I just say my savings is not part of this conversation. I have this issue, this problem to be solved, this bill that needs to be paid, this expense I need to come up with money for, but my savings is not part of that conversation. So now what do I do? And then I had to, as I said, go back to really looking critically at how I was spending money, and how much I was doing to bring money in. As a self-employed person, I got to ask that question. That was really the beginning of this practice. And I found that it was possible to hold on to that $30. It was easy in the very beginning to add a little bit to that $30 because it wasn't a lot. But slowly, I began to add a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more to that $30. I really recognized that I became kind of this heroic, inventive, creative, strong, willing person the more desperate I became. It was like I waited until I was right down to zero to let all of those mechanisms for problem solving really kick in properly. If I was feeling a little cushy and comfortable, I wasn't doing that problem solving at that level of clarity and urgency. I just wasn't. And so the base balance exercise was about pushing back on the timing of what I was doing, taking the savings that I did have off the table, taking it out of the discussion, forced me to let all those kind of heroic problem-solving mechanisms kick in a lot sooner than when I was down to zero. Instead, they would kick in when I was, I still had some money left. And I called that money that I had my base balance.